Good afternoon. We have a couple of speakers that are coming back from the NASA tour. One who is on his way back and should be here before we begin his presentation, but we want to go ahead and jump in. We have a pretty full agenda, so we're going to start the presentations. We may have to take a short pause at some point to allow one of our speakers to get here. You made it. Hopefully the tour was good with it.
Oh, it was fast.
Good.
Okay.
So welcome to the Team Florida Toll Ops and Engineering Focus Session. Kevin hopefully couldn't make it today, so I'll be doing all of the introductions for our group. The focus of the session is on AV impacts and our future. It includes both from the roadway side, security side, and the vehicle, and then Carrie's going to go into more of a trends in tolling in the industry, and Mr. Ely's actually going to come up and introduce Carrie Witt, our last speaker. We are going to hold our questions to the end and do it more on a panel type of platform so that you can ask all of the speakers related questions. The speaker group, as you'll find out when we go through their bios, kind of has a West Coast flavor to it based on their colleges, except for two. But for being in Florida, there are two members that went to California universities, which is interesting. We're going to start tonight with Adrian Moore, president of the Reason Foundation. And just to go through his 4-page bio here, he is vice president of policy at the Reason Foundation. He has his PhD and Master's of Economics from the University of California. He also has a degree in history from Cal State. So there goes our West Coast connection. He leads Reason's policy implementation efforts and conducts his own research on topics such as privatization, government and regulatory reform, air quality, and of course transportation. In 2008 and 9, he served on Congress's National Surface Transportation Infrastructure Financing Commission. The commission offered specific recommendations for increasing investment in transportation infrastructure. He's authored or co-authored 2 books, the first being Mobility First, A New Vision for Transportation in Global Competitive 21st Century, and also Curb Rights, a foundation for free enterprise and urban transit. He's had work that's been published in the Wall Street Journal, Los Angeles Times, Boston Globe, Houston Chronicle, Atlanta Journal, Orange County Register, as well as Public Policy and Management Transportation Research. In 2002, he was awarded a World Outsourcing Achievement Award by PricewaterhouseCoopers and Michael F. Corbett and Associates. His work showing government how to use public-private partnerships and the private sector to save taxpayer money and improve the efficiency of their agencies, all important to our agencies in the state of Florida. He did serve 10 years in the Army, and we thank him for his service. And with that, I'll let him get going on his presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks. So I am an economist, so I've been thinking about the automated vehicles stuff through that lens, and I want to share some of that thinking with you. One of the things that's really struck me about this, given that I've lived through a couple of technological changes that were pretty big, like the advent of personal computers and of smartphones, and I sure don't remember the hype being quite as out of control with those two as it has been with automated vehicles. There's something about this technological change that has more people either predicting earth-shattering change or more people decrying the hysteria than seemed to be the case the last couple of go-rounds. So one of the things I've been doing the last few months is doing research on past technological changes and how accurately people predicted what the economic impacts and the social impacts of those things would be. And you probably won't be astonished that our track record for accurately predicting the effects of technological change is really, really poor. So take all, pretty much everything with a grain of salt when it comes to predictions on this stuff, because it's pretty speculative. So what I want to focus on is what happens when they become ubiquitous. There's going to be a gradual process by which these things come about. How gradual and how rapid that will be is another thing we don't know. But assuming that they're now a fairly significant part of driving, what kind of impacts does it have? And this is just captures, every time I talk about this, I wind up talking to people who are either very pessimistic about what the effects will be, sort of the economic effects, and are very optimistic. So all, I guess, in people's temperament. I've also learned that there is no technological change that some people don't think is awful. There's actually a whole group of people that think that when we quit hunting for survival and learned how to grow crops, that was just one of the most terrible evolutions in technology ever. If we had remained hunter-gatherers and there was only 100,000 of us on the planet, we'd be much better off. I have trouble buying that one, but there actually is a group of scholars and folks who think that. So every change has its detractors. No surprise, something as fundamental, at least in the United States, to our sort of lifestyles as automobiles, that it would be more controversial and all. So I want to touch for now a few minutes on the kinds of places where there might be significant impacts. And again, we don't know how much or how fast any of this will be, but just to get you thinking, if you haven't already thought about like the scope of what these impacts could be, just a minor change along this axis, the advent of ride sharing, which is not even really a baby step to automated vehicles, but it's a shift away from this I own my vehicle, I drive myself kind of model of transportation to something more complex and taking advantage of technology. One of the things that's striking is that it took this comparison, which is from one of the accounting firms, I can't remember now, compared how long it took Toyota to reach this 250 billion capitalization versus how long it took, in revenue, versus how long it took ride-sharing firms to get to the same amount of money. And we're talking about 30 years versus 3 years. So at this level of the transportation's role in the economy, even small changes in technology can have huge economic impacts. So obviously, I think the first thing a lot of people think of when they think about the impacts of automation is trucking. For shipping companies, drivers are just a cost. And if you can get rid of that cost, that's just a business bottom line decision. Now, I don't think every truck moving into every place is going to be automatable. There might be specialized driving jobs, but it's pretty easy to imagine trucking jobs being one of the first ones to get major impacts. Car salesmen, what happens when, vehicles are in fleets and they're all owned by Uber or rental car companies, and you're using mobility as a service instead of owning a car, and now car sales are wholesale, and fleets buying directly from the manufacturers, and there's no more car salesmen. Auto insurance changes dramatically. Again, if we're purchasing mobility as a service, then insurance is built into the service we're purchasing. We're no longer buying auto insurance for ourselves. What does that do to that industry? Maybe it doesn't change things that dramatically, maybe it does. Certainly the car rental business changes dramatically. It already is dramatically impacted by ride-sharing companies. And that's, again, a baby step compared to automated vehicles. Now, here's where I get into my first sort of grain of salt point, which is there's a great study that just came out a few months ago looking at decade by decade since 1900, this particular particular graph only shows the 1950 data. And they looked at several data sets, and they looked at how many people are changing professions in each decade and comparing that to technological change. Not changing jobs. Like if you're a plumber and you go working from this plumbing company to that plumbing company, that's not what the data captures. It's if you're a plumber and you become a teacher, that's what it's capturing. Because that's what we think technological change does, right? It eliminates truck drivers and all those people have to become something else. They don't go from driving their own truck to driving for a company. That's a change of job, not a change of profession. And interestingly, this decade is the lowest amount of people changing professions due to technological change since 1900. I don't have the earlier data, but it's all higher than this. In fact, if you look recently, it seems like there's a lot more technological change happening, but what's happening is professions are adapting to technological change rather than going away entirely. And in fact, when I was looking into this, somebody made the point that, you know, one of the great examples of technological change people always like to roll out is the buggy whip, right? When cars came along, we put the entire buggy whip industry out of business. Well, buggy whips are made out of leather, so these were these were companies that were designed and had people who were skilled at making a particular leather good. And when buggy whips were made extinct by cars in the space of about 7 years, they started making car seats. So they didn't lose their jobs, they just changed their jobs. And they didn't change professions, they just changed their jobs. So over time, I think we're seeing more and more of that, where there's lots more technological change going on, but in fact, people are getting better at adapting to it. So the idea that all these people are just going to be living off of welfare because their truck driving jobs or car sales jobs go away doesn't track with what the data shows. I think people are a lot more adaptable than that. Other things that change. So this is just a cheesy little diagram sort of pricing out. If you're taking a trip from Sarasota to Miami, driving in some sort of shared ride service versus flying and pricing it out. And the point here is just that while flying may still be much more attractive than riding in a van with 3 other people, the costs start to get really competitive. When it's an automated vehicle and you can just set it up on your phone and do point-to-point service, how much more attractive does that get? So at what ranges are these automated vehicles or automated vehicle services of sorts? You could also imagine this being a nice limo, a minibus or something like that, providing pretty high quality, comfortable travel, much cheaper than flying, which I wonder if the Brightline folks are thinking about this, because about the time they finally get that thing fully built out, they might have a lot of competition from really sweet automated minibuses, and you know, that could really affect their bottom line. There's also upsides. One of the biggest ones that economists look like is time. In some ways, the money cost that we pay in commuting is the biggest sort of computable economic impact of our commuting. But a full cost accounting also takes into account your time. If you have an hourly rate that you earn, when you spend a half hour each way driving, or let's say you're unfortunately living in a place where there's some traffic, let's say it's more like 90 minutes or maybe 2 hours a day driving, that's quite a bit of billable hours, so to speak, for whatever you make. And in some ways it's worse than that, because that time is also a drag on your productivity. It's not just lost time, it's also time that sucks value out of the rest of your time for many people. What if you can entertain yourself during that time, work during that time, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, the possibilities get kind of endless. It starts adding up to a lot of value for each individual as well as the companies that they work for. How much more will you drink if you never have to worry about driving? Polls say a hell of a lot. So it's a good time to invest in bars. But yeah, I mean, this could actually, this could be one of those really, really big mixed bags, right? Like, on the one hand, automated vehicles the biggest cost of this is probably on the road deaths, and it may largely eliminate those when we get to the full rollout. But then again, people who have trouble drinking lose one of the constraints that maybe keeps them from being out of control. And so how many more people have problems in their personal lives because now they're unrestrained in their drinking? I don't know. Real estate is a huge impact. I mean, our current system for using automobiles consumes a lot of real estate. In the more efficient systems that are visualized in the world of automated vehicles, we free up a lot of land, mainly due to parking. Think about the mall or the shopping center that has the Walmart on one end and then a whole string of restaurants and dry cleaners and all that stuff that you have in a big kind of strip mall shopping center complex. If instead of that gigantic, 5 times the size of this hotel parking lot that you have at every one of those places, you have a parking lot, you have enough parking for whatever, I don't know, 50, 60 cars, something like that. And you have an area that's set up like a transit, one of those big bus transit what am I trying to say? Transfer stations. So the whole idea is it's well designed to have lots of vehicles be able to flow in, pick people up, move out, right? Flow in, drop people off, move out. That takes up far less space than all that parking. So that means you get to throw up, 6, 8 more restaurants or whatever in your shopping center. So it starts to get pretty dramatic. And this is just somebody crunched some numbers and compared the amount of parking to 2,000 Manhattans. That's the amount of land occupied by parking spaces with our current fleet, not counting the garages at home. And of course, I already mentioned accident costs. I mean, it's a gigantic economic cost, lost time, death, injuries, all of that. If we only take a bite out of it, there's a lot of debate over how safe these things have to be before it makes sense for people to adopt them, which that hopefully will be a personal decision. I'm I feel very aggressively about being an early adopter, but polls keep saying most people are still pretty hesitant. But my feeling is the most likely thing in your life to take your kid or your grandkid away from you is some jerk in a car. And the sooner we can replace them with a robot, the better. I don't care if it's just as good as us, because it'll get better, and humans aren't getting better. So let's get those robots in there. If we go from 35,000 deaths to 25,000 deaths, that's a huge victory, I think. And I think it'll probably be much, much better than that. And then there's all the people who can't drive. Young people, old people, people with vision, blind people, you name it. I love to cross that picture. There's a lot of people who don't enjoy, they have mobility via paratransit and transit systems and getting rides from people and stuff like that, but that doesn't compare with the kind of mobility all of us who can just jump in our car and go enjoy. This promises, and in fact, this is another thing you already see with mobility as a service, ride sharing, that this provides mobility to folks who weren't really enjoying it before. I want to talk about kind of 2 bundles of issues that then, all that's possible, but what's actually going to happen depends on what we decide and how fast the technology evolves. I can't say when the technology is going to evolve, but I will say that last week GM announced officially that they have a level 4 automated vehicle that they are submitting for full testing to the federal government and the various test beds that are going out there. Nobody really saw that coming anywhere near this soon, and so a lot of people have revised their timelines about how long this is going to take to be much closer in light of GM, which is actually one of the more conservative players in the technology space. If they say they're at level 4, then there's probably a lot more advances going on than people realize. But how much are we going to worry about those displaced jobs and prevent change in order to protect those jobs? We have a kind of push me, pull you history on that. When economic change changes jobs, we don't necessarily like that, and we often resist the change because of it. But looking at that data about how people seem to be adapting to technological change, will we get better at that and reduce the pain and cost of those changes? And will we do a good job of developing policies that make it easy for people to shift to new jobs, new professions? And then specifically to the tolling industry, the tolling industry, I think, is in the same boat with regard to automated vehicles that local MPO and state planners are. Trying to figure out what's going to be going on 15, 20, 30 years from now. We don't have the parameters to put into our models for automated vehicles. We don't know what the elasticities of with respect to these changes in technologies is going to be. There's a lot of things that we can't plug in. So basically what we have is a lot of, quasi-scientific wild guesses going on. So it's really more about asking the right questions and trying to start triangulate in on those answers. How much are they going to affect travel? There's very, very good theoretical arguments that they could increase the total amount of capacity needed, or that they could decrease the total amount of capacity needed. The consensus seems to be drifting towards the latter. With every new conference I go to, more and more people's models and projections and theories seem to say it just looks like more people are going to travel more, and there's going to be the vehicles may be more efficient. We maybe get lots more travel per vehicle space, but there's going to be so much more travel that we're still going to need lots of additional capacity. Business might be good. The ownership and payment models, are we going to go to all fleets, or are individuals going to own their own automated cars? Who knows? How much are they going to be electrified? How much are they going to be a mix of technologies? How do we pay for the services? So again, if we own our own car and it's just got a robot driver instead of me, then not much changes with respect to how we feel about gas taxes or whatever fees are put in place to replace gas taxes as these vehicles get more efficient. Doesn't probably change things with respect to tolls. But if you look at polling or various sorts of information about how people view tolls when they're using a ride-sharing service or a taxi, you know that people's perception of that is fundamentally different from when they're driving their own car and they have to fork out their own money, or they have their own transponder even. They think about it in a way they don't think about it when it's embedded in the price of a service. If the automated vehicles are fleets and we're buying it as mobility as a service and tolls are just in there, then maybe people care a lot less about whether they're using a toll road or a regular road, and a lot of the controversy we have over putting tolls on various facilities goes away. And that, of course, leaves aside if we make the shift to mileage-based charge instead of gasoline taxes, and tolls become sort of embedded with that in that framework. And then the big kicker is I'm talking about how people respond to it. Then there's the question of how legislators and folks like that are going to respond to this. And there's a whole lot of nobody knows at this point, and there's not a lot of answers. But I think the place to be looking is at how the different kinds of both policy and behavioral responses to mobility as a service, ride sharing, and all those related models of car sharing and those kind of services. Those are shedding behavioral light in ways that isn't like what we've seen with kind of traditional models, and maybe tells us more about how this kind of technological change will affect both of those things. So